I'm currently struggling with getting good prints on both my Saturn IIIs. Almost every print has these terrible layer lines, and while I'm trying to figure out what the problem is to finally get bigger projects done again, I thought let's make the best out of it, and I can at least show you how you can save print fails like these. Of course, there's a line between fixing a failed print and just reprinting the parts, and for these heads, although I already printed them at least 7 times, I'm gonna reprint them until I'm satisfied. But I'm not going to throw them away either. They will come in handy later to try out painting techniques before going to the actual head. But since I already wasted so much resin on failed prints and all of that creates a bunch of waste, I at least want to save some of them now. If you look at these prints, you can clearly see that the torso is a complete failure with massive layer lines and even splits. But this one leg here looks okay-ish, so I'm trying to save it. It still has a lot of layer lines, but at least no splits, and since this is supposed to look like latex later, it has to be completely smooth, so in theory the only thing I need to do is sand away the layer lines. And after this example, I'm also showing you prints with layer lines and splits, with texture, and how to save those as well. So the first thing is to set up a box or bucket of water, because you don't want to have resin dust flying around. Then I take a sharp scalpel to cut away the big support marks, and then I take a sanding sponge with something between 180 and 280 grit to sand the lines away. These grits will take away a lot of material pretty quickly and at the same time not cause deep scratches that can't be covered with primer. And the water not only helps avoiding dust, but with a spray bottle you can very easily avoid clogging of the sandpaper. And after sanding for about 10 minutes, I use putty for all the spots that are too deep to sand away. For example, divots from support marks. Then I repeat the sanding with 180 grit until about 99% of the putty is gone again. Then I clean it up and give it a round of primer from the rattle can. And it looks pretty good already, there are just some tiny spots left. So another round of quick sanding at those spots, primer again, and then that's the final result, which is a night and day difference to where we started. But you could say flat surfaces are easy to fix anyway. What about prints with some texture? Although I would reply to that the flat surfaces are way more time consuming. The textured ones might need a little bit more practice though. This traffic light here has some really pronounced layer lines, and since it has texture you also can't just sand it down. So I reprinted it, but the reprint has the same problem. I don't want to print it a third time though, so let's try to fix this one too. I do an initial round of sanding with the sponge again, and since it has places that are hard to reach, I also take my D-Spy sanders for a little ease. Then I took a toothpick and put a thin layer of putty everywhere where the lines were extremely pronounced. Then I gave that a quick sand, cleaned it up and hit it with primer. And the good thing here is the structure that is created automatically by the putty blends in really nicely with the original weathered and worn texture. Maybe a tiny bit more sanding, but then it's perfectly paintable. This Invincible hat has some tiny print lines around the shoulder that I guess some people would not even care about, but for me the surface needs to be perfect before I can start painting. And his boot here has layer lines on one side and even a split on the other. So this is a piece that's right at the border of reprinting. But since it's at a lower part of the foot and the boot will be weathered and look dirty later anyway, a little bit of surface imperfection won't be noticeable later or even add to the overall look. So to not lose the leather texture from sanding, I'm just going to directly apply putty. Then I take an old and stiff paintbrush and somewhat try to recreate the leather texture. After the putty is cured, the split gets filled up with Aves Epoxy Sculpt. For the hat I used the exact same technique, and then I just very lightly sand over the putty once it's cured, because we still want to preserve some of the texture, but also blend it in with the non-puttied parts. And after hitting it with primer, this is what it looks like. I think if you wouldn't know that those places were fixed, you wouldn't notice it. Of course, you could spend even more time and use something like an engraver to recreate the leather texture on top, but I think it's good enough. If you have a more complicated texture on your part, for example fabric, you can also use the tip I showed you in this video, along with my other tips and tricks about post-processing resin printed parts. Now I would like to know from you whether you are team fixing or team reprinting. Let me know in the comments down below. And with that, we're wrapping up this video. If you want to see the finished versions of these parts, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And I'll catch you in the next video.